This is the clay I'm going to use to build a pot. Wedge it up a little bit, get some air bubbles out. Working on a piece of canvas here so that clay doesn't stick to the table. This is a form, it's a wooden bowl. Sometimes they're ceramic clay. The Pueblo people call it a puki. Some people call it a chuck. And all it is a little form to hold the clay in place while you're working on it. I roll it out to about a 1/4 inch thick. If there's any air bubbles, they'll show up. Take the clay and just kind of press it into the chuck. You don't want to push it down too hard, otherwise you get another air bubble. Basically get your clay to the bottom here, and this will be the base of the pot. Trim it off. It's like a pie. I score the edges a little bit around the rim. Give the first coil a good gripping surface. This is the process we use to make a traditional style pot out of coils. The clay I'm using is a standard stoneware clay, which is a high fire clay, but our pots were only fired to about 12 to 1400 degrees, so at that temperature the stoneware clay is still under fired and porous, which would be like the pots we originally made. They were still porous. This is some slip, a slurry of clay, which I use to bond the coils together. The walls of the pot are being built up by this one coil, and what I'm doing now is joining the coil to the wall of the pot. You can add as many coils as you want, depending on the size of the pot you want. Pinching the walls of the pot up, make it a little taller. Now I'm taking the cord wrapped stick, cord wrapped paddle the coils together. This makes the bond stronger, and it also serves a purpose of thinning the clay wall and bringing it up. And the cord wrap on the stick leaves a texture on the outside of the pot, which you find on a lot of the old Iroquois pottery. I'm going to cut off some of this excess so that the wall's a little more even. Same height all the way around. Then you just repeat the same process, scoring the edge again. A lot of the pots I've seen didn't have the scoring on them. I do it just to make sure it stays together. You find some of the older pots where the pieces they've added on, like the effigies, pop right off and there's nothing behind them except the other clay parts without scoring. So if you have the clay at the right consistency and wetness, it'll stick together quite a while without scoring. But I just like to make double sure. Right now I'm just pulling them up a little bit where the coil met the top of the pot, the rim. I'm going to add one more coil. This one's not going to be as thick, so it won't be as heavy and pull down the wall of the pot. Once again, I'll add some slip where it's going to meet. Just add this one to the top of the rim. A little bit short, but I'm just going to stretch the clay a little bit. Now this inside seam, we gotta smooth that out. This is a piece of gourd cut into this shape to make a scraper. The modern counterpart is a wooden piece like this to form different shapes on the inside or straightening out on the outside. This one has different curves for different applications on a pot. This one I use on the inside to smooth the seam. And this longer side here can go right along the bottom, kind of pushing the clay in, pressing it, smoothing it at the same time. And then we get back to the outside here, where we push the clay down here to seal that. Now you can take little pieces of clay, small coils, and add in as a filler, just to ensure you get a really good bond. All of the old pottery, most of the Pueblo pottery and Hopi potteries are still done by hand using these methods. Most pottery is done by one or about 5 different ways you can do a type of pottery. And this is, coil building is one of them. It's one of the more useful ways. There's also wheel thrown, but we didn't have wheels, so the chuck kind of works like a wheel, but it's slow. Paddle again. Use my inside. Sometimes they say it's a cord wrap and paddle an anvil. This would be the anvil where the clay is pressed against that. I just use my hand You can see it's getting a little bit taller, thinner each time you paddle it up. And smooth that out again. You can see exactly where the seam is on the inside when you paddle it. And at this point, I'm going to start bringing it in. This part of the pot is called the body. The bottom of the pot is called a foot. And what we're going to do next is make it a neck, which is adding a couple more coils. Most of the tools we used were very easy to make, very few tools. Paddle and anvil would have been a shaped stone. Deer antlers were used for a lot of different texturing. We didn't have needles like this because we didn't have the metal, but we used sharpened deer bone instead, which works just as well. It's a wampum shell. This would also be used as a scraper, as a shape that you want to push the clay out, and it makes that form right here on the outside. This is another thing that was supposedly used for texture. Some of the potters now are using it to texture their pots like that. But I've only seen one actual cord wrap stick, and it was basically just a piece of wood about this long that had been charred, and it had some kind of twine around it. But one of the theories about the texture is that it would provide us gripping space if you wanted to pick up a hot pot with like leather pot holders, so you wouldn't get burned. It also serves as a method of doubling the surface of the clay, so that when you're cooking with it, it heats faster. I think most of the technology that was involved was trial and error. If it worked, they'd repeat it. If it didn't work, they wouldn't do it again. Like a human sewing machine here. And the same process again. Attaching the coil to the rim. Cut it at an angle so that it will have more surface to adhere to. Now, if you're doing a larger pot, you just keep adding coils going up and up and out. But you have to let the clay stiffen up a bit, let it sit for a while, and then it gets stiff so it can hold the weight of the pot you're putting in there. The more clay. Once again, I'm using this antler this time to reach in there. It's a little smaller space for get some of it smoothed out. But the antler also has a curve to it that is what you're trying to bring up here, just to make sure it's going to hold together. And then we take our paddle again. I'm going to flare this out a bit with my thumbs and forefingers. What we're forming here is the neck. I'm also pulling the clay up a little bit at the same time. Clean that off. I think I'm going to do one like this. It's called a Seneca notched or Seneca barbed because it has these notches on the bottom, and it's pretty typical of Seneca pottery. So we'll do that. This pot here has almost the same shape already, one of these two. These are pots, I think they were found locally. Well, Seneca country, could be all the way to Rochester. Most of the pots have are named after the spot they're found at, not really by the tribe or by how they look to the anthropologist that's naming them. This is the neck here. Now I'm going to add the collar. The collar is the extended wing or rim. They're very simple designs really, but very efficient as far as cooking and function. The bottom is rounded, which is another advantage for cooking because it spreads the heat more evenly and faster, like a wok. Most of the pots had all rounded bottoms, or the original ones, the first ones had really pointed bottoms. And they were more cylinder shaped, cylindrical. Work up another coil for the collar. The collar can be added in one slab piece, or as what I'm doing is another coil that I'll probably flatten out once I put it on. Make sure I got enough to go around. Our pottery wasn't very durable, and when the Europeans introduced metal, copper kettles and brass kettles and things, we favored those and took them in trade and eventually stopped making our own pottery. A lot of the nomadic tribes didn't make pottery at all and used gourds and animal skin bags for water and stuff. But we were more or less in one spot, so we'd usually pick out a spot that had both clay and water at the site, and also sometimes on the top of a hill where you could see the enemy coming or anybody coming. Looks like I'm going to need a little bit more. And I can feel a little hard piece in it. Clay right there. Now I want this part here to stick out a little bit. So I'm going to add a ridge that'll also fill in the crack there. Joint. I put it over here and let it bridge where the seam is here. So it also holds that together. Now most of what I've learned about our pottery, I've had to research myself and just kind of guess using what I already knew about making pots, combining it with what I read about Iroquois pottery, and I was lucky to be able to look at different collections of Iroquois pottery and be able to handle them to see how much they weighed and different things. So when I looked up Iroquois pottery when I first started trying to make it, there really isn't a lot, there still isn't a lot written about it. Especially how it was made, how it was fired is one of the main things that's still hit or miss for me. I got from 50-50 success to pretty close to 90% now. There's a lot of different things involved in the firing because you can't control it. It's an open pit fire. So on a windy day you get crosswinds that'll make the fire hot on one side and uneven. And when the fire's uneven and the pot gets hot on one side, it would tend to crack. So solving that problem was something I'm still working on, other than encasing the pot and protecting it from the open flame. If you do that, that's basically a rudimentary kiln. Some of the Pueblo people use large pieces of broken pottery to cover their pot with. And I noticed in some of the Greek and Roman kilns, which were basically just cylinders with iron bars going across for shelving, and they would put their pots in a pile in there and fire it up, but they would have crushed pots, or not crushed, but broken pieces of pottery surrounding their pots too. And the fire would be on the bottom and coming up in this grill and open on the top, no chimneys or anything. So it was a modified pit fire actually. Since you can't control the weather, you could control the clay by adding things to it that would make it less likely to break from what they call thermal shock, when too much heat is applied to one side or too quickly. Clay still has water in it no matter how long you dry it. It still has water in it until it's fired to about at least past the boiling point, 250 or 300 degrees. So once it's past that temperature, it's fairly safe. So getting it to that temperature, bringing it up slowly, and reduces the risk of it cracking. One thing I found out or learned or read about somewhere was that your first fire the beginning when you first start firing, you use softwoods, which burn at a lower temperature than hardwoods. So you can't go over a certain temperature with it. And once you sure that the pot has reached a boiling point, you can add hardwoods to build the fire up even higher. Hardwoods, even in an open pit, I've had measure out about 1400 degrees. Now, there's the neck here, what I'm working on, smoothing out. Collar. Let's see. The neck and the collar on this one are a lot bigger than what's in that drawing. They used to think, which is probably partially true, that the neck was made like that so that you could tie a rope around it and suspend it. And a lot of pictures and drawings and paintings I've seen of old pots, they have the pots hanging over the fire with a rope, which I don't agree with, because if the rope caught on fire, you'd lose the whole thing, which after spending 3 days building a big pot, you don't want to lose it. So I would think that they would use a tripod of stones to put the pot on, so that it was fairly secure. This one has a collar. Yeah, it's about right. Let's do one more scrape here. I've got my finger under here, these fingers up here, to kind of give it a bracelet for pushing it with this. And for decoration, for the, what they call some people call it lugs. Some are added on. A lot of them are impressed in like this. Put the notches in. No, that would go like that. Well, mine will. Now the Pueblos, different families had different designs that were like, that they were known for. So if you saw a pot with a certain design, you'd know which family it was made by. But I don't know if that's how ours were. When I started this, there was actually no one doing pottery the way it was done in the pre-1500s. I spent a lot of time just making tools that would replicate certain marks that are on some of the pots. Some of the effigies. It's about 30 years, I guess, now I've been doing this. So that's basically what you have right there, Seneca notched. Could be finished up a little bit more when it sits up a little bit. But that's about what we have here. The Seneca notch looks like a gear. just let it dry and put it in the fire. The collar, the neck, has an advantage of keeping the contents from spilling, even when you're carrying water in them or something. That was the big improvement over other things. Was the function of pottery was a lot better than what they had before, like baskets. Mice couldn't chew through storage pots like they could through baskets. So it was a big improvement otherwise, technically, and that's it.